Welcome to the Lucy in the Sky with Dinahs series, where Natasha discusses psychedelic-assisted therapy within high-demand religious context of sexual and religious trauma. Natasha is joined by Aimee Rossi and Aimee Heffernan. Note that neither Natasha or the Amies are doctors. They do not condone illegal behavior. Please make sure you know your local and state laws before using psychedelics. Go to learnreligiontherapy.com for upcoming CE information. Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her core resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast series, Lucy in the Sky with Dinahs, with Natasha Helfer, Aimee Heffernan, and Aimee Rossi, where we talk about psychedelics, sex, and religion. Can it get more fun than that? I don't think so. We would love to hear your comments and questions along the way, so feel free to share those in the thread so we can address them either live tonight or in future episodes. And then we just want to remind everybody that we are not your therapists, and psychedelics are not legal in all the states. So make sure you're checking in on what is happening in your region as to what is accessible. So we are not here to encourage any illegal activity or anything that you don't check in with in regards to your own healthcare professionals that take care of you. Is that a good enough disclosure?
Good job.
It was great. Are you with me? All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Super nice to see you as always.
Yes. Nice to be here again.
Yes. I'm going to hang out with the two of you. So tonight we have some questions that we got from folks that we want to address. We're starting basic. I mean, this is only, I think, the third or fourth time that we're doing this. So we're still kind of on basic topics. The questions are, what exactly is psychedelic-assisted therapy and how does it differ from recreational use? And what can we expect during a session? Like, what actually happens during a session? So I think that's where we're going to get started. And then we'll each kind of weigh in on that. And if there's anything else we can address, we will. Yeah. So why therapy? Why not recreational? Like, I'm guessing I'm kind of lame. So where do people do psychedelics recreationally, like rave parties? I'm like, because I'm lame. I
always love to help explain to you, like,
I don't know all the fun things you can do. I just know the therapeutic things.
Yeah. It was lovely. Once I went to a conference and they said that you can come to psychedelics for fun and play, and you can come for awakening, and you can come for worship. Healing, and then worship. And I kind of like to think of it in those three different ways. So this is going to be a fun conversation for us to kind of say, let's focus in on why would you use psychedelics in a healing kind of way, right?
So what did you say were the three things? Fun?
Play, fun, like recreation.
Okay. Yeah. And then awakening?
Well, no, I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say healing, like therapeutic, like, okay. Yeah. And then it was, the last one was like worship or for spirituality.
Worship. Yeah. Okay. All right. So play, healing, and worship are three major ways folks show up with psychedelics. Do either one of you want to talk a little bit about what a typical experience might be in the play sphere before we get into more of the healing sphere? Like, what are people usually looking for? it social? Is it individual? Like what are people doing in playland?
Aimee, do you want to go or do you want me to take this one?
I mean, either way, but I guess I'll start. I'll jump in by just saying, I didn't come to psychedelics via the recreational route. I think a lot of people do. I will say I hear a lot from my clients, like, yeah, I was doing, mushrooms, or I did cannabis, or I did whatever when I was in high school or even college. It's more college. Like when I was younger, I would do these things. I just don't understand how they could possibly be therapeutic. Like I was doing that with my friends, my mom, my friend's basement or whatever. So I know people do it a lot like that. I know a lot of people use these medicines when they go to raves or concerts or that kind of thing, but that was not the way that I made my route and my way to these medicines. But I also want to say that, those three categories that Aimee laid out, they also kind of go in and out. I think people who have done these medicines recreationally, say they've gone out like in the desert or whatever they're doing with their friends, and sometimes they have a spiritual experience, right? Or sometimes somebody can be going to a therapeutic, they're going to do psychedelic-assisted therapy, and then what happens is they just get a case of the sillies and they laugh, and it's like more recreational and play and fun, right? I think that's the nature of these medicines when you're working with them, depending on how you're working with them, that they're kind of going to do what they're going to do because of how they work, right? So I think they aren't like three distinct separate boxes. I think sometimes they interweave, but I think there are things that you want to do and be aware of when you are saying, okay, I don't just want to do this recreationally. I actually want to do this with some sort of intention and in a therapeutic way. I definitely think they are different things. And even though the world's kind of, can overlap a little bit, there are different things that set the more therapeutic space or even the religious space aside from the recreational space. And I think one of those big things we can jump into next, but I think one of the big things is intentionality, right? I think and I'll say this, even when people do it recreationally, they're having an intention. Their intention is to do it recreationally, which is, I think, why sometimes people are confused. They're like, or maybe they have no intention of doing this therapeutically, but they're like, why is this all over the cover of magazines? Why is this, Netflix show? Why are people doing this for healing? I did this back in the, whenever, and I just had fun with my friends. How could this possibly be therapeutic? And it's like, well, because you did it intentionally as a way to have fun. And so that is what the experience was for you, because that was your intention. When somebody's going in to do it therapeutically, they traditionally are not focused on fun. It might be a byproduct, but generally it's about the intentionality.
I mean, we can have fun while we're healing. What?
And sometimes doing, again, I'm not promoting, I don't want to say that I'm whatever, promote illegal activity, but I do want to also say that I think sometimes using these medicines recreationally can also be quite healing for people. And that's, I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there too. Sometimes, especially when you leave high demand religion and you've been told, yes, no, this is right, this is wrong. Like sometimes having your own authority to do, you got your medical card and you're doing cannabis with your friends and you're having fun and giggling. And like, sometimes that can just be therapeutic and healing too. Yep. So I also wanted to throw that out there. Aim, what were you going to say?
Oh, I completely agree. Because it's like sometimes when you go in with just the intention of like, let's have fun and chill, and then your heart really opens up from the nature of these open, connecting kind of medicines. And then you end up having way more spiritual than you realize, right? So, and then that like goes into the kind of like, you're worshiping, you're like, wait, I'm confused. I thought we were just having fun. Why am I crying? And so that's why I do see overlap, like all of it overlapping too. But, oftentimes in the last, like few years, as I've like seen different experiences as it relates to the healing component of this, I actually wish I have a little campaign. I know that all my therapist friends hear me say this a lot, but I wish we would use a different word than like therapy assisted, like psychedelic therapy assisted. It doesn't really feel like therapy. I've been a therapist for over 15 years, and the space feels different, and it's hard that the therapy word's been attached to it. And so I don't know, maybe I got to make up a new word, but there is, as a clinician, being trained as a clinician, it's hard to have some of these experiences have like a clinical, like step-by-step outline that can be measurable because they're so organic. And so So I just want to say out loud, can I just say that Aimee doesn't love the word that therapy is associated with it because of the fact that it feels more like when you do it in this kind of context with the intentionality that Aimee was talking about, there is almost something that you're birthing out of you or releasing out of you or coming to intention in the ritual that is really clearing of whatever whatever intention you're putting into it. And again, if you're going to go have fun and go to a dance and a rave and you're going to dance your little heart out, I'm like, heck yeah, like you do that, right? But coming to it with a very ritualistic way changes the tone and the frequency of the experience. So what you bring to the consciousness of the experience also really matters a lot. And so when people are really pretty depressed or they're having a hard time wrapping around some whatever issue, whether it's relational or personal or in a familial way, these experiences kind of help tone down some of the harsh, rigid ways of being in the world. And so when you've been told so many stories about how to be in the world, you can come to these experiences trying with a more open-hearted, more like, all of the rigid ego stuff can be turned down a little bit and you can meet it soft. And so that's why I think that there's a healing component to these, because you can meet yourself very gently. So that's my first little bit. So Natasha, do you want to chime your initial little thoughts in?
I think my initial thoughts are twofold. One is I'm noticing how we really divorce the word pleasure from healing.
Okay.
So that's an interesting thing. Just like as a sex therapist, I think we oftentimes divorce, especially coming from religious spaces, sexuality from spirituality, right? And so I am interested in finding pleasure in healing and joy in healing. And I think psychedelics have a role to play in that. Yes. And even as you were talking about, I understand your frustration with the word therapy, the way that it has been, I guess, colonialized or medicalized.
Okay.
I think that this is an argument that I see even, especially trained as a marriage and family therapist, where we were trained systemically and the medical model just does not do systemic therapy. I mean, if you're going to go into couples counseling, for example, even though your insurance companies might tell you that they cover couples counseling, they really don't. They really don't. The system is that we have to find a sick person, and then that sick person gets a diagnosis, and there is a CPT code for an insurance company where we can say, well, that sick person who has this diagnosis might have a family member that needs to come in and support them in a therapeutic setting. And then that CPT code is given to the insurance company. So when you're looking at the term therapy from that modality, yeah, this looks nothing like that. Even with ketamine, which is probably the quickest type of experience you can have with psychedelics, that's for us at our clinic, that's a 2-hour experience. So you already don't have a code that you can give to the insurance company that says, hey, this is a 2-hour experience that this person needs to go through this healing process. There's no procedural code for that. So I think that's what you're kind of getting at. I would like to reclaim the word therapy and stick it all over this stuff, because I don't like the medical model, deciding what therapy is going to be or look like. Plus, I do like that those of us who are therapists, nothing against necessarily other guides or coaches or things, but there is a training, especially in ethics, which we will talk about throughout our time together, that really, I think, also leans into this experience of boundary work, of power differential work, of making sure that you're not imposing yourself. I mean, all the skills that we learn as therapists that it's just not really out there very much in a lot of other trainings for facilitators, and why we hear a lot of really crummy stories of people that run into some of those ethical unfortunalities in this space. I would like to reclaim pleasure and therapy for this movement.
Okay, I love that this will be a continuing conversation for us then, Natasha, you know? Because yeah. Okay.
And one thing I just want to throw out there a little bit, and this might be veering off, but I think it belongs in the conversation, which is that, you know, I always want to bring back that Indigenous communities have been doing this long before therapeutic communities came into be doing this, right? Long before, you know, science and that colonial said, oh, look at these work, look what they work for this. It's like, yeah. We've known this for thousands of years, right? Yeah. But I also want to say it's very different model, right? We have to also honor the way that the Indigenous communities do it. Sometimes they don't do it for healing. Sometimes they're doing it for celebration. Sometimes they're doing it for connection, for the tribe to connect and come together, right? And then they're doing it in a very different way, right? And the shamans are trained for years, often as children. They, you know, are, you know, maybe they come from a family, or maybe they, you know, the elder of the community kind of has their eye on a certain person. So they're trained for decades and decades on how to do this. And in a community way, it's done very differently than in medical model, right? Which is why I sometimes say, like Natasha was saying, like through an insurance route, right? You have to be sick to use these medicines. And in a traditional Indigenous way, you don't have to be ill. You can be to use these medicines, but you don't have to be. And so sometimes I have some trepidation around medicalization, right? There is a part of me that, like, I see all the sides, right? We talk about that a lot, but sometimes there's a part of me that is wary about medicalization before decriminalization with certain plants. We're talking about certain medicines, because now all of a sudden you have to have a diagnosis to be able to use these medicines, right? And so I don't think that there's any short answer or that we're going to solve this. What I would like to say is there's wisdom from all the traditions. I think the best we can do is more of a holistic approach to these medicines. There's something to learn from the scientific community. There's something to learn from the therapeutic community. There's something to learn from the Indigenous communities about how they hold and use these medicines, right? And not in a way to take, but like in a way we all have something to add and bring to the table to make these experiences safer, more ethical, more effective, right? If that's really the goal when working with these medicines, and understanding the nature of the psyche, just how those three different communities, scientific community, the therapeutic community, also, you know, Indigenous communities, and then, you know, like a community like mine, depth psychology, they all look at the psyche so different. I don't necessarily think one is right or wrong, but the more perspectives we can have, now we have more voices at the table. We're able to look at things and have a broader perspective when coming to work with these medicines. So I also just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I love that perspective. And the fact that, yes, we are circling around trying to create conversations around exactly this topic. And I like it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, let's throw in there, like, with Natasha's pleasure. And what was the other one? Pleasure and fun?
Therapy. Reclaiming the therapy and the pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say also, like, community. You know, we talk a lot about, when we talk about psychedelic therapy, it's often we think about kind of like MAPS does it, like you have two facilitators, you have one person in the room, and that's one way to do it, right? But I actually think that these medicines are quite communal in nature, quite feminine in nature, communal in nature. Nature itself is communal, belongs together. Like we know, like the three sisters, what is it, squash, corn, and they grow together when they're together. They grow better when they're together, right? And I think because a lot of these medicines are plants, they are quite communal in nature. So something to be thinking about too, that psychedelic therapy doesn't always need to be one facilitator, one client, or 2-on-1, or however it's done in the research center or in the therapeutic clinical space, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the basic question then, is what?
Yeah, lots of information for everybody.
What exactly is psychedelic assisted therapy? Well, I would say one way to look at it is kind of like, well, what is talk therapy? And that can look a myriad of different ways as far as how the professional in front of you is going, what kinds of questions they're going to ask you, what kinds of things they're going to focus on, whether they come from a systemic lens or a narrative lens or a, Bowenian lens or whatever it is. And so I think what I want to say as a basic answer to that is that it is a space that's created And depending on the medicine that's being used, that's going to dictate probably the amount of time that's going to be allotted to that space. So like I mentioned before, ketamine is 2-hour space. Psilocybin or some of these other ones, it might be more like a 6 to 8 hour space. And those can differ depending on the person as well. And it's going to be primarily a person coming in to that space who wants some type of goal from that experience, kind of like most therapy. You want some type of issue that you're working on, and then a facilitator or two, depending on how the modality is, that will help you go through that experience, while typically either asking some questions or reminding you of your intentions, or bringing up like a lot of, things that you've kind of predetermined you wanted brought up during this time, and kind of seeing where it goes, which is kind of how most talk therapy is, right? I mean, people come in with an intention. They want to talk about something. Sometimes by the end of the session, we're talking about something completely different that came up. And sometimes we stuck right with it, right with the topic at hand. And hopefully by the end, you've had some increased insight or aha moment, or maybe even if you haven't, you've walked away with something to think about going forward. So what do you want to add to my very simplistic description?
I'll go. You want me or Aimee? Yeah. Okay. I love the image of an iceberg that like part of a presentation that Aimee does is that she talks about, the psyche and dipping into the unconscious realm of our souls is like, you first kind of got to meet your own layers, and then you kind of dip into the collective layer too, right? And so these experiences, when you're trying to say, hey, I'm open for an experience like this, that I want to meet it therapeutically for the sake of just, we're using that word, but I feel complicated about it. But say, I want to come to meet these experiences in a therapeutic way, in a healing way. And like Natasha said, kind of it depends on, the molecule that you're meeting and what kind of experience that will bring. And so, but for the overall goal of anything, I think it's, this process of coming to meet yourself and to deepening a sense of knowing. And these medicines have a beautiful way of doing that. Since the beginning of time, people have been having these experiences. And so having somebody kind of tethered to the upper world as you kind of dip down into a more mystical vibration of soul space, that is having the setting, like, Michael Pollan talks a lot about set and setting. And what is the setting? And someone that has experience and training and ethical awareness on how to hold that kind of space, it can be very, very healing and therapeutic and beautiful. And it can also be fun and silly, like we've said, and it can also be spiritual. And that's why there is such a beautiful overlap to this all. And so it's another way to meet yourself, and it's gentle and lovely. And, the experiences can bring a lot of different insights. It can bring up shadow. It can activate some wounds. It can make you see different perspectives. There's all kinds of things that it can bring. So I guess I forgot what exactly the question is, which is part of like the curse of Aimee, but like, I definitely think that like coming to these experiences, they are therapeutic and healing, and my eyes have seen many beautiful things. So Aimee, why don't you take it from here about what you think about this?
Okay, so as you were talking, I was thinking about, okay, so how is it different, right? I've never been in the clinical therapist like y'all, right? But I've done a lot of therapy myself, and I've held space for hundreds of people on various different molecules and in that space, expanded space holder. And what I would say is, when clients come to me and they say, often one of the first questions I ask is like, well, so why do you want to do this? Why are you here? And honestly, usually by the time people come to me, I'm the last resort. They have tried a lot of other things. They've actually, a lot of my clients have often done years and years of therapy. And they said, I've done lots of therapy around this. What they'll say to me is, I know the ins and outs of like why I did it, what's happening, or what trauma happened in my life. I just feel like I'm missing something, like I want to go deeper, or there's something I'm missing about it that I want to go a little bit deeper. And they're right to have that sense of what these medicines and molecules can do. They literally can take you deeper. Like Aimee was saying, my experience of these medicines is they do quiet down that default mode network where that sense of I resides, or that ego resides. It dissolves it a little bit in that when you go into that neuroplastic state, it will actually unwire some of those old pathways that are laid down, right? And what that allows for is like what we talked about in the CE that we just gave, the 1 hour CE, and we have plug for our 3 hour CE coming up in November. Well, we're going into this deeper, but what happens on these medicines is when you go into a traditional therapist, you're talking about your trauma, you're talking about what you know, what you already know about the situation. You're able to deep dive it, you're going to the past. A therapist, a good, well-trained therapist can actually help you see things from another perspective. They can really do some of this beautiful work. And sometimes therapy can take you so far and you kind of know, I think I just need to go a little deeper. And what these medicines can do is that when that default mode network is kind of quieted down, what happens is other parts of your brain start firing and start wiring. And all of a sudden you can see things from a different perspective. These medicines, they're often referred to as visionary medicines. Sometimes they really do. You do see things, right? But I call them visionary medicines because they help us to constellate and activate the art of seeing in a different way, from a different perspective. And yes, maybe you know all the bits and pieces about your particular trauma or what you're coming to work on, but maybe on the medicine, you're able to see it from a totally different light. And I can't explain this until you've really experienced it, but maybe the medicine might give you an image, a symbol, a metaphor to help you maybe understand it, to maybe see it from in a softer way or a different way, or maybe you're able to see like kind of some puzzle pieces coming together and how this, worked out so that this thing happened and this thing happened. And right, I don't exactly, every single person is different. But what I will say is generally people who have done a bit of therapy before they come to psychedelics often have better experiences because they have self-confronted in a way where their therapist has allowed them, done some work on the psyche, allowed them to see things differently from different perspectives and in different ways, asks them so self-confronting questions. And so then they're able to come and see something different. Like, so say someone's like, I've done all this work on depression, I've treatment-resistant depression, I've been on our SSRI, I've done years and years of therapy, and then they come and they do this experience. And what happens is they come away with like, I don't understand, but I know that I'm deeply interconnected to, I don't know, maybe an ancestor comes, or who knows? I don't know what could come. But they step away with this deep sense of interconnectedness. It's an experiential kind of transformation that often happens. Aimee and I often liken these experiences to deaths and rebirths because you come in with one perspective and often you leave with a different one. And each one is different. Each molecule is different. You could sit with the same molecule 10 times and have a different experience every time, depending on where you are at that moment or what your intention is or what you're coming into. And so I often say these medicines can often take us down below even the ego realm of what we know about the situation, down even a little deeper, sometimes to the archetypal realm where we can see it from a completely different perspective of what archetype was at play, or, sometimes that comes in, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a deeper way of looking at it. So when you ask the question, how is this different than even traditional therapy, or how is this different from recreational? Usually when people do it recreational, they're like, I'm just having fun. I'm just here for some fun, some connection, whatever it is. And when someone's saying, I want to work on this specific thing, I want to look at that, because you're setting your intention, you're kind of telling the medicine where you want to go. When we talk a lot about set and setting, that set actually refers to mindset. Where is your mindset? Wherever your mindset is, generally where you will go. This is why sometimes people will say to me, oh, I did mushrooms back when I was young and I had a terrible experience, or whatever. And I'm like, well, yeah, tell me about it. And they'll be like, I was in this dark basement with all these strangers. And I'm like, yeah, I can see why you probably had a crazy experience. You know what I mean? Because the mindset and the setting, literally the setting that you're in, but also where your mind is. If you are with strangers that you don't know in a weird place, and now you're in an expanded state and your sense of self is gone, that is going to create an experience that might not be exactly what you're looking for, right? So I'm glad Aimee brought up in set and setting, right? Because what you're doing is with psychedelic assisted therapy is very different than recreational. It's also very different, in my opinion, than traditional therapy. It's a whole different ballgame, whole different beast.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything everybody has said. And I'm trying to think, like, how do I describe it as a person who's both been the guide, the clinician, and a person who's been in those settings myself. So when I'm observing, when I'm in talk therapy, obviously the person in front of me is very centered on me. We're having a conversation. There's lots of eye contact. I'm asking a question or asking for some processing, and they're talking and I'm engaging, and don't like we are in lockstep with one another. I mean, it's a conversation, right, between two people. That's in general what therapy is. Whereas when I'm setting the stage for a ketamine, it's come into this space. I usually have them. There's a big couch where they can kind of make themselves comfortable. And many times they may even have an eye mask on if they don't really want to see much. There's lights on the ceiling I've set up for them. They're not really looking at me very much. They're kind of laying back and positioning their heads in a space that's comfortable. And now, again, in my setting, we have them take the ketamine troche, and they start noticing usually something, the influence of the medicine, within 10 to 15 minutes. And sometimes I can't tell, right? So I have to ask, like, are you noticing? And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm noticing. And I'm like, okay. And sometimes I can, just through their body language, like they become quieter or more introspective, or they start talking slightly differently. And so now we're kind of in a different flow. We're in a different flow, and it's not so conversational. It's more like this person is in their maybe like a daydream stance of some sort, and they're exploring their mind and their thoughts and whatever's coming up. And then I'm very cautious at this point, because this is where I do therapy differently, like in regular talk therapy versus now I know this person has medicine on board, to be less maybe directive in my questioning, be very open-ended, reminding them of something that they brought up, asking for imagery. Is there any images you're seeing? Is there any symbolism that you're noticing? Sometimes I'll get kind of somatic as well. Like, are you noticing anything in your breath or in your body? Although with ketamine, a lot of times we're not noticing our body as much because it is dissociative. A lot of times I'm asking, do you notice a texture or a color that represents, and anytime I kind of do these open-ended things, sometimes there's quiet for a minute, but typically people start taking off with one of those ideas, right? Or bring in a different idea. And it's also a space where we can do inner child work, because I can say, okay, well, especially if they're talking about something that happened in the past, it's like, oh, well, can we go talk to that little person, that you're talking about right now? And it's almost like playing with creativity and imagination in a way that I can't really do in just regular don't talk therapy. If that makes sense. Does that describe a little bit of what we're trying to capture here?
Yeah, and like this is like where it's like I want to add on why, like, I have some beef with the word therapy in this, but because of the fact that like, number one, 6 to 8 hours hanging out with someone is so different than that therapy experience that like I did for a long time. And so exactly what you were saying, it's kind of like a daydream state. It's a more playful, flexible, the nervous system is much more flexible in that space. And so it's easier to kind of say, ooh, let's look at these patterns and let's look at this dance that you're doing in your life that you're wanting to undo, because I'm a little relationship witch. And so a lot of relationship stuff comes up with me. Sexuality stuff comes up with me just because of the vibes that and the experience and the niche that I have. And so being able to play, like how you were saying, it's more imaginative, like Natasha, it's more archetypal, it's more mythical, is exactly like what Aimee was talking about. And it's like, we're able to kind of bring these different worlds in this kind of magical, mystical space that these molecules create, that allows for some flexibility that's fun and creative for someone who's been doing clinical therapy for my whole career. You know, it's been different. It's been fun to see. It's been a little twist for Aimee Heff to be like, wow, I was doing one thing for a lot of years, and now this feels like more playful and more creative and a little bit more like, you know, it's unexpected. Like, I don't know what's going to unfold in a 6 to 8 hour experience. I usually can predict after 15 years of being a therapist how most couple session goes, or most individual session goes, or most like family sessions go. It's like you kind of have these themes and it goes. What's fun about these experiences is when someone feels very ready to meet this in a more clinical way, or a more playful clinical way, I should say playful clinical way, okay? Or mystical clinical way, it opens up space that I wasn't able to access as a clinical therapist. And so that's delightful for me. That's all I wanted to say to that. It's like, it's a delightful experience. It's different than the therapy experience. It's more contained. It's you know, like with therapy, I wasn't defined how long I was going to see someone. Sometimes I had clients that I saw for a long, long time, like, you know, like a decade long of a relationship, a therapeutic relationship. These experiences aren't that. It's more of a death and rebirth experience. You know, a lot of times people don't need to do these experiences tons and tons of times and over again. Sometimes it's nodal experiences that happen at a specific time in their timeline when they really need to meet like this big awakening and kind of healing experience. And so at least from my perspective, it's fun to see how it is not a little bit different, a lot different than traditional therapy. I think people are surprised that they go in thinking it's going to be just like a very long therapy session. And it is that, but it's also full of surprises. And that's fun to experience with people. Mm-hmm. And for myself.
Yeah, and definitely. And one thing I would add too is like, okay, so when you're gonna do recreational, right? You're usually, well, I don't know how some people do it, but it's like spur of the moment often, or like, let's go do this, right? There's not this, when you're usually doing it therapeutically, or even if you're doing it religiously or ceremonially, right? There's often a lot of preparation and pre-work that goes into it. It's often not just like you show up and have this thing. The way that Aimee and I, when we're facilitating, and that's why I like the word psychedelic facilitation, a little different. Well, first of all, I'm not a therapist, but I like facilitation. I like midwifery even better because it often is like I don't like the word guide specifically because I don't know where we're going to go. The person on the medicine is going to tell me where we're going to go. What is going to come up? They're going to let us know. They're going to let me know. And then I am going to go with them where they're going as a support to facilitate the space so they feel safe enough and they feel supported and resourced enough to go wherever they need, right? And different people show up very differently on the same molecule, on the same amount of molecule, right? Sometimes people will not talk the entire time. They need to go very deep inward, and we'll do a lot of the talk stuff in the integration sessions, right? Which normally when you go out recreationally, you're not doing integration sessions either, right? So usually the way Aimee and I work when we work with these medicines is we're doing at least one, sometimes two prep sessions. Like we're doing sessions beforehand. We're doing a lot of those things that are important even in therapy. We're building rapport because the more rapport you have built, the safer people feel to go as deep as they need to go wherever they need to go, right? That first session, we're talking about history. We're going over a full medical screen. We're going over like, why are you here? What have you done? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Talk to me about the whole thing. Like we sit down, we say, tell me your story. Tell me your story. Why are you here? Why this? Why this? And then we open up the experience, right? Then when we get on the medicine, because I never know when the person gets on the medicine where they're going to go. I have no idea where the medicine is going to take them, but I always trust that it's going to be exactly where they need to go and what they need to see, right? My job is to help them feel resourced and supported, right? And then we come in different than an recreational experience, unless you've got good friends and you're, circling up after to talk about it. Most of the time you don't do that in a recreational experience. But you're going to circle up and you're going to say, okay, now when our ego's back online, at least twice, the way Aimee and I do it, at least twice, we want to meet at least twice. And one thing I want to add in the conversation that I'm really noticing in my own experience is how critical, yes, the day or two after is critical, but what I'm actually finding is that week 2 to 3 is so important. That is where neuroplasticity starts to wear off. And this is often where it's easy to bump back into old behaviors. It's actually really easy to say, because that 2 to 3 week mark, people will notice, okay, because they come in that first integration session, right? 2 or 3 days after, they're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling really great. I had all these downloads and this is all making sense. It's all connecting. And then when I meet with them in that 2 to 3 week, all of a sudden they're like, I don't feel the same anymore. I don't feel that openness. All of a sudden that deep interconnectedness I was feeling is not here. What now? And so I feel like the 2 to 3 week period is so critical when we're talking about psychedelic assisted facilitation or therapy or whatever we're calling it. This is a time period where we really have to focus in on, as facilitators, this is the critical time period, because it's so easily you can sometimes go, well, do I have to do that thing? There's a lot of, in this therapy, it is a choice. You're seeing things differently. And now you get to choose to show up differently. Sometimes people think, because they're called, sometimes people literally call them like psilocybin magic mushrooms, and they somehow think that means that they're magic. No, these medicines, whether it's ketamine or psilocybin, they're helping you to see things. And then you have to then go and implement them. And how do you continue making changes in your life as that neuroplasticity starts to wear off?
And to steal a phrase from Michael Pollan, it's like how to change your mind. It's like not only changing your mind, but how to change the patterns in your life that are not working for you anymore. How to change the old stories that you keep telling yourself that keep you stuck in the patterns that are not making you happy, making you sick, keeping you sick and keeping you out of alignment with yourself. So that soul space is really important to kind of be able to identify and talk to people about what it is that they want to change and how they want to shift some of those inner things. And this is why it's different than just the recreational. There is soul space in there that does science and magic. It's science and magic. That's a little song that Aimee sings a lot, because it is science and there's some mystical magic to these experiences too that really allow people to make change. And it's really healing and beautiful.
Yeah, I really appreciate your languaging around guide versus facilitator. I really like that, because I agree we should not be the ones guiding. It's the person's psyche who is guiding. But having somebody there to facilitate, to keep people comfortable, to check in, that's great. So I'm comfortable with both facilitator and therapist. I'm happy with both of those. Okay. I think a lot of that is what we're supposed to be doing in therapy too, is allowing other people to guide themselves into the healing and not, I guess, projecting our own stuff as a therapist onto our clients, right?
Or even thinking that you're the expert in knowing what's true for them or what's their inner knowing, sometimes just helping shine a light post on as you walk down into the shadowy space of the psyche, just having someone be a little bit of a light post of oh, where are you going? Okay, I'm going to walk with you. Where are we going next? And so that's, I kind of like to picture it like that, is that I'm just holding a little light as they're walking down into it and holding their hand. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Aimee, Rossi.
Oh, I was just going to say, swinging it back to ketamine, a few times when I have facilitated ketamine, I think it's also, we need to differentiate between, a lot of ketamine clinics do large dose, right? Where they will, and we can talk about that. There's different ways. Even there's different ways to even do ketamine assisted therapy. Some people get it intravenous. I think you can also do intramuscular, right? Where you do like a really large dose, and then sometimes people are in the room with you, sometimes they're not, depending on where you're getting it. I think you're one of the few spaces, Natasha, that is doing it the way that I think ketamine, the best way that I think ketamine should be done is psycholytic, which is a term that was kind of coined back in the 50s and 60s with psychoanalytics. So they were Jungian and Freudian psychoanalysts were using psychedelics and doing it with low dose psychedelics. So they were doing more therapeutic, so low dose psychedelics, where then they could actually do that therapy work where you're kind of doing like traditional therapy with some medicine on board. I would say most ketamine facilities that I'm aware of, at least here in Utah, don't do it like that, right? And I think this is a way that we're not really using ketamine very much, because the benefit of a dissociative, yes, you can have these experiences where you will actually hallucinate, but also a benefit of a dissociative is actually sometimes it's nice to be a little bit offline when you're talking about something that is traumatic. When say you're like, okay, I want to go in with my therapist and I want to talk about this experience. Kind of similar, different than EMDR, but a similar thing. Like with EMDR, right? You're trying to get your psyche in this space where you can talk about something that may be activating when it's less activating, right? Through the way that the brain works, right? Same thing, different tool, same similar thing. So when you told me that this is how your clinic does it, I was so thrilled to hear that, because I've done this a few times with clients in the same way. And what happens, what I'll notice is I'll say, because I'm not a therapist, because I don't usually traditionally do this kind of thing. But when someone will say it, I say, okay, let's explore this. Why don't you talk to me? Let's go over it again. And when they're on the ketamine, sometimes I'll just say something different. We've talked about this trauma before, but all of a sudden they'll say something different, or they'll say it in a different way. And they'll just, it's almost like that part of their ego is offline just enough so that they can say the thing they've never said before. That's really helpful. That's really helpful.
Yes. Well, this is exactly what I was going to kind of get into, was because there at the end of your last comment, Aimee, Rossi really talked about integration. Aimee Heff's talking about integration. And I think that's a huge difference between recreational use of these types of different, whatever we want to call them, drugs, medicines, and doing it therapeutically. And I agree. In fact, these clinics that do ketamine from the perspective of offering the medicine only in high doses, I would call that treatment. That's a treatment. Just like you're going in for an infusion, right? Or a chemotherapy infusion, or, you're getting a medicine that your body needs and can be benefited by it. I do think it still benefits people to do it that way, but it is not therapy. It is not therapy. And I would agree that if that, and I think a lot of these clinics, that's all they do. So they come in for these treatments or these infusions, but you don't really get the 1 or 2 day after integration, or even the 2 to 3 week later integration, or even the 2 to 3 sessions prior that you were mentioning it, where really, you might meet with a psychiatrist and get, kind of like a reason why you have a diagnosis that would necessitate this treatment. But even that's fairly assessment centric and not so much storylined like we do assessments more in a therapeutic setting. So I think I want to be inclusive of all the ways. At the same time, I'm like, my way is best. No, it's not my way. The research shows this, right? The research shows, and it's what
best practices. We're talking best practices.
Best practices. And as I've, so many of my providers who work at Symmetry have gotten trained on this as well. And many of them are beginning to work with ketamine in their clients. And this is what all of them are saying. They're saying this is so helpful and beneficial. And so, to do that beginning, the middle treatment, where we actually offer the medicine in conjunction with the talk, and then the talk afterwards, right? And if you do that several times, wow, I think that's where the magic and the power happens. As far as some of these claims, that you hear in the journals that are saying, oh, this takes the place of like 3 years of therapy or something. Well, yeah, but if you're doing it in this way, I think that the other way, you're getting the medicinal benefit, which can, I think, especially be useful for suicidal ideation, maybe for treatment-resistant depression, and, will lighten it. And even those folks, usually will get relief for about 2 to 4 months, and then we'll need to go through another series. And so it's fascinating to me when I'm listening to some of these histories where they've done that, but nowhere in between was their therapeutic talk work also kind of being downloaded. And I think we're missing a huge component there of human healing. How do humans generally heal is through community. That's really how we heal, is through storytelling, through sitting with somebody, through having another person mirror you and validate you and see you and witness you. And then one last thing I'll say too, because I am a huge fan of EMDR. I have not gotten certified in EMDR, and so I usually refer out for that when people are interested in that or when I think it would be useful. At the same time, I have talked to many of my clients where EMDR lands heavy. It lands heavy. It's heavy work. And not that heavy isn't good and necessary, yet I am having been through some freaking trauma myself, I'm kind of tired of heavy. And I have felt like my treatment experiences with psychedelics, ketamine and psilocybin have been my 2 experiences in healing spaces, have not been heavy. Even though I've done some heavy lifting, and yet not felt heavy during nor after these experiences. For me, that is incredibly valuable. And so I know there's lots of trauma-informed ways to go about things, EMDR, ART, NARM, and psychedelics, I would say, are all the more kind of like non-traditional, non-talk therapy approaches. And I'm just going to say my favorite is the psychedelics, even though I really do not want to downplay any of those others because they're all super important and they all have their place. And sometimes people do a variety of things. Anyway, any thoughts on all that? I feel like
I agree. Psychedelics are not for everyone, right? And some people have, for whatever reasons, different contraindications. I think there's something for everyone. I think what psychedelics offer is something unique and different. And I think we are just scratching the surface on how to use these medicines and in what way, right? And how we're just beginning to develop best practices for these things, right? And so I think, obviously, I am a fan, like you, these medicines have changed my life. I mean, I got into facilitation and into teaching others how to facilitate because my own life was changed, with these medicines. And it's hard to really explain how these medicines work. And I think one of the best ways is by saying they are experiential. When you go into a medicine experience, you are almost giving yourself a bit of a key of the unlocking your own pathway forward on whatever you're coming to the medicine with. It's not going to be therapists telling you what to do. It's your own insight. It's your own wisdom. It's your own path forward. And, that's powerful. Like, we're so much more likely to take our own insight, our own wisdom of like, oh my gosh, yes, right? And it's powerful. I just a couple weeks ago sat with the medicine because, I've had this undiagnosed eating disorder my whole life, and I'm mostly in recovery. That's what actually brought me to plant medicine all these many years ago. And I am mostly in recovery, but it pops up. And I think, like you guys know, you're clinical. I think eating disorders don't exist in a vacuum by themselves. OCD, I've got some OCD things. And when things get triggered, my eating disorder behaviors pop up. And I was noticing my eating disorder was even popping up in my dreams. Like, I was having dreams about it and stuff. And I was like, oh, I gotta look at this again. And when I sat, it was like, I was talking to my therapist and I said, we were talking about things, and she was, we were going over options, and she was saying, if only there was a way to neuroplasticity, and without telling me. And I was like, oh yeah, it's been a really long time. I haven't, why have I not come back to what I know has always worked for me? And I had this really profound and powerful sit where, my intention was not like, take this away. Because the first time I sat, it was like, fix my food issues, fix my food and body issues. And of course, now that I've done a lot of work, I know that eating disorders are complex and they're not about food and they're not really about body. They're not really about those two things. They're about the patterns in the brain, right? And the story, the noise in the brain, and how you relate to those things, sure. But it's not really about the food. And so, my intention was not how to take this away, which is what it has always been. But these medicines continually teach me, how do I actually go into deeper levels of wholeness? How do I learn to live with the part of me that I don't want to live with? How do I learn to love the part of me that I want to other and I want to get rid of? And so my intention was, how do I have the medicine teach me, how do I actually really experientially live into wholeness? How do I do that? How do I be with the parts of me that I want to push off and change and get rid of? Because my eating disorder pops up when I feel violated, when I feel manipulated, when I feel a loss of respect. It's like, oh, okay, so then I need to manipulate myself into being whatever it is, right? And then I came out and it was a hard day, but it was like, right, I've got to learn to love the parts of me that I want to get rid of. That's totally different than most things you're going to get in and I mean, good therapy, I think, can do that for you. But even if my therapist had said that to me, you got to learn to love the parts of yourself that you don't like, I may have still heard it from this outside voice that was telling me what to do. Well, how do I do that? It's a great idea, but how do I do that? But when you're in an expanded state, all of a sudden your brain kind of opens up and you can kind of, oh, that's how I do it. I actually learn to love the thing I want to not be in. Like that idea of wholeness is like, you can't read wholeness from a book. You have to experience it. And these medicines, the psyche is all about wholeness. And you sit with yourself, you learn to love yourself. And I literally have been having dreams about my disorder. And then I come out and I'm like, I literally think about myself differently. And that's not to say it's cured or it's fixed, right? I'm in a constant recovery. But what I know is the path is not going to be, how do I get rid of this eating disorder? The path forward is always going to be, how do I love the parts of myself and come into deeper relationship with the parts of myself that I want to other and get rid of. And that's just a peek into how these medicines work. They're not traditional. They literally want you to change the way you look and see and perceive even yourself, other people, the world, and that's, then you walk away. And now that I'm into the 2 to 3 week, this is why I'm bringing it up. I'm realizing this is critical, because here I am in this piece of the puzzle where I'm like, oh, that other way of thinking about my body is so familiar, so familiar. I could easily go back to that old pathway, but I'm choosing the freedom that I've had the past 30 weeks of not having to live into that mindset, of just learning to love myself. And I bought this statue, you can't probably see it, but I bought this statue after I had my ceremony, because it was like, I have othered the body so much. And it's just, it's time for me to just, like, this is the body. Like, this is what I got. This is my body. I'm tired of being at war with it. And Glennon Doyle, is that her name? I was listening to her and she said, I've always thought, I'm going around and around with my therapist. How do I make peace with my body? How am I at peace with my body? And then she realized the metaphor of it. No, how do I go out and make peace with my body? How do I go out and make peace in the world with this body I have? And it's like, yes, why am I at war? I've got to learn how to be with the parts of myself that we hate. We are so divided, not only in this country, but I think collectively there's this psychic split. And I was realizing that is what is at the root of this eating disorder. I have got to love the thing I've other, And so, yeah, it's not traditional therapy, but really beautiful work. If you're willing to do that kind of work, life-changing,
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a lot of vulnerability and personal disclosure, and which I think is awesome when we're willing to do some of that, because it makes it more real. Sometimes when we get stuck on the abstract or the educational piece, people are like, yeah, but what does it look like? And so I think you did a really beautiful job there. And plus, you're saying things that I want people to start registering, right? Like these medicines are shown to work for things like OCD, like eating disorders, like anxiety, like PTSD. I've been hearing about depression for a long time, and depression is a huge part of all of our clinicians' lives. But when I started hearing PTSD, I was like, okay, hold on. Because I feel like if I was going to show, working with people from religion and working as a sex therapist, I feel like trauma is the primary pool I live in as a clinician. And I was like, okay, now I'm really interested. Maybe I should have been more interested just when it was about depression, but I was very interested in this. Plus, the intersections between trauma and depression are also, somewhat interesting. So this is exciting that there are new tools available to so many of us who are consistently, continually, trying to improve certain aspects, and sometimes hitting some walls that we're frustrated about. Aimee, what are your final thoughts? Maybe
my final thoughts are, Aimee, thanks for always sharing those personal things. Cause like, it's scary to be like, I have an eating disorder and OCD and, and it's like, I want to say like that really rigid nervous system that we got in the messages of high demand religion, like all of us, obviously, like the LDS teachings, right, were really imprinted on us from such a young age, right? And like the mystery of like, well, how do we unwire some of the wiring has been the question of a therapy clinician's life. Like, how do we change the system, the family systems? How do we change the relationship systems? So these are things that have been on my mind for so long. And so being able to actually see the shifts in your personal experience, talking about how you've like faced your OCD and how you faced the eating disorder, it's just a real vulnerability and honesty that I think a lot of particularly women need to hear, like those things, because they're not as openly talked about. And so I guess my final thoughts is just like how reverent I feel for these experiences. Like from my own personal little like plug here is like, like Aimee came to the medicine for those reasons that she shared. But for me, it was like the secondary trauma as like the classic archetype of the wounded healer was really why I met these medicines, where I was like, I don't think talk therapy is gonna like solve some of the like pandemic first responder, like Mormon first responder kind of career that I've been holding for a really long time. And so for me, I just like have the deepest of vows to these medicines for me, because it was almost like helping me with my secondary trauma of like kind of career crisis. Like, I don't know what to do. And I wasn't prepared for a pandemic. Like that was really tough therapy for me on my personal timeline, And so for me, I had come really vulnerably and really reverently to saying like, I need help. Like I was at more of a rock bottom, like where I think a lot of people come to these more in a desperate place if they're coming for the healing therapeutic aspect of this. And that was true for me too. And so I feel passionately about having these experiences be accessible to people, but I realize that how complicated that is right now in our world, and how the war on drugs have created a lot of stigma around what these experiences are. And so I like to at least be a voice to say, hey, we can change our mind about what we've been told from the DARE program of growing up in the 80s. Like I grew up in the 80s where, it was so much that DARE program was like ingrained in us to not think that these experiences could be holy or sacred or reverent. These would only be recreational and we should be afraid of them, and they were going to cause major disasters. But for me, it's been nothing but unbelievably like releasing and therapeutic, at least on a career level for myself, to say that I've come to meet these and with the intention of saying like, I've got some sad stories that I don't know like where to put them. And so, the medicine has really helped me like get back to myself, and I've loved the work that I've been able to do in life, but it also was really tough. It's tough to hear how the patriarchy has hurt everybody. Like, really, is the truth is not just women; it's men and theys and thems and the queers and all the people that I love deeply. And so, So it's been great to be able to see how these can help in the ways of all of the like OCD and the scrupulosity and ways like the sex, like we haven't even talked here about like the sexual shame that I've like been able to see how it has transformed and been able to open people's soul space to unwire some of the stinky, stupid stories that they've heard about their little sexy selves. And so I will finish there because that's my little testimony of the night, but I appreciate the vulnerability that we can talk about these in a sacred way. So.
Well, it's interesting that all three of us, I think, because I'll share now too, since you all both shared, but that all three of us would say the first time we came to this type of medicine was out of desperation. My first time coming to this was after both my excommunication and after my divorce, which happened pretty, close together in my personal timeline. In fact, the finality of both of those were within a month. My little nervous system was having a hard time. And I did, I went to therapy and I know all the things. I know how to do the grounding and the mindfulness and the mindful apps and the sleep hygiene and the, reframing my thoughts and going out into nature. And I was doing all those things and still waking up every morning, like on the verge of like a panic attack, the anxiety and just the hardship of that, right? And so I too, in desperation, turned to psilocybin at that point for a healing journey. And it was, really was, I'm not going to say it like turned everything around for me overnight, but it like gear shifted something that then within the next 2 or 3 months, something really profound shifted. And I stopped waking up with those kinds of panic attacks. And it just kind of gave I don't know, it's almost like a soothing, I want to describe it almost like a soothing oil or something, like aloe on a sunburn. Like the sunburn's still there and you can still kind of feel it, but it feels refreshing and you can kind of manage it in a different way. And eventually the sunburn went away. So it was my first experience. Now my second experience with ketamine was not out of desperation. It was out of clinical curiosity and wanting, okay, well, hold on, what can we do with this? And so I just went to this training where I did partake of ketamine so I could see what that was like. And it, surprisingly, I did. But I remember going in thinking, I don't want to think about these things, like that. And that's we can talk about that too, what people worry about going into these things. So I went in going, I don't want to think about these particular things. And for me, that's usually my sexual abuse from my childhood, adolescent years. And then also, that was what I mainly went in with. But because of that, and it's, there's particular perpetrators, right, that are in my brain. And so, and then of course, because I go in with that thought, what's the first thing I'm thinking of is these perpetrators. And then who joined those perpetrators? Oh, the stake president who excommunicated me. And this other person who harmed me, right? And it went all the way up even to, sadly, if you don't agree with me on this, it's sad, but for me, President Trump was in there too. So all of these men that for me felt very harmful just showed up in my ketamine journey. And kind of the daydream and the visualizations I had about those was so interesting because even though I was like, oh no, there was this part of me that was like, crap, see, because again, the dissociation that happens with ketamine, it wasn't so hard. I was like, yep, there they are. There they are. And then I had this like kind of visualization where they kind of became cartoon characters and they kind of went off into space and it wasn't anything horrible. They were fine. They were safe and I could watch them just kind of fly away. And ever since that moment to this day, this was like what now, 3 years ago, when I think of any of those personas, there's a different visceral reaction in my body than there used to be. And I didn't even go in with that intention. And I wasn't in crisis mode. So this is why I want to just share, like, if you're desperate, by all means, please consider this. But if you're not desperate, please consider this because you're right, Aimee we were taught your brain on drugs, scrambled eggs, this will ruin you.
It was a disaster model for sure.
it's robbed us of so much natural healing. And I don't want
Beautiful.
to say without any side effects, but with very few side effects compared to some of the, drugs that we take for mental health, which again, I'm supportive of those as well. But it's just so sad to me that we've missed out on, just like it makes me sad that Mormonism really made me miss out on sexual pleasure and sexual understanding and sexual potential for most of my life. I'm also very sad that the war on drugs has affected so many of us, most of us, in the ability to lean into nature for healing. So, yeah, there's all that. I do want to share a comment that came in. Shannon Hickman has been watching. For those of you who don't know her, she's also a sex therapist here in the Utah Salt Lake City area. She's awesome. And I love that you listen to me, Shannon. And if you're listening, mwah, loves you. Anyway, she says, I think ketamine has changed the game. It's an incredible medication at low doses, legal, and has very little side effects. And this is why I lean towards ketamine. It seems to be easier to set intentions. So I would agree that I think the benefits of ketamine are legality, for one. So then more easier accessibility. And then two, I think too, just the shorter amounts of time in a busy schedule and all of that. I do think obviously all the medicines have lots of wonderful potential, and we can go into maybe an explanation of differences in the future. But ketamine is legally available here in the state of Utah, people where the three of us are. And I think in most states, I think it's legally available for use therapeutically. So any final thoughts from you, Aimee Rossi?
Wow, that what a great chat. I like this woman who commented yes, these medicines are so powerful and so wonderful. And it's I am constantly in awe of where science and medicine and nature all combine, where they can take us and what can happen. My final thing I want to say is, if you're suffering, there are options. There are options out there, and I am crossing my fingers that it's only a matter of time before we legalize or eventually somehow medicalize, legalize, decriminalize. Understand it will become so unethical for us to withhold psilocybin from the larger community. I hope for that, because it's a shame that it's illegal, because like ketamine, it can create that neuroplasticity, but instead of 48 hours, we've got 2 to 3 weeks. Now we have a bigger window to work with. So this is what I will say. If you're suffering, there is hope. Just traditionally been talk therapy, but also these medicines like at Natasha's clinic, there is help out there. And sometimes you have to think outside of the box, and that's what these medicines help you to do.
Thank you. And I love that language, that it actually is already, and it will definitely become unethical for the government or for regulatory practices to withhold this, basically something that grows from the ground, when you're talking about mushrooms in particular, from people, and in particular, the people who understood these medicines way before we ever did. So Aimee Rossi has mentioned my clinic. That's Symmetry Counseling. You can find us at simcounseling.com. And we do offer ketamine prescriptions through our nurse practitioner, and also the guiding or facilitating, as I'm preferring to call it, tonight's session. And we can offer that through all different kinds of levels of expertise, so that hopefully, depending on cost, you can find something that is comfortable for you. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are not necessarily covered by insurance, but we try to do our best to kind of incorporate insurance wherever possible, like for the pre-sessions, the post-sessions, and even some of the work through ketamine that we can offer certain time slots, through insurance, versus the entire experience not being completely covered. Troches, which is what we do, are fairly reasonably priced. So that's not necessarily the medicine itself. If you do the psycholytic effect, which is not IV and not IM, is very reasonably priced. And so we encourage you to reach out to Symmetry Counseling and or either of these Aimees, who also facilitate and have other ways of working with folks. The other thing we want to announce is that, so we did our 1 hour free CE, which, by the way, that's available to anyone. It was recorded. If you go to my platform, learnreligiontherapy.com, we did a 1 hour CEE that was called Sacred Disruption, an Introduction into Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy within High Demand Religious Contexts of Sexual and Religious Trauma, which, I'm sorry, this intersection is so freaking exciting for me, right? And it goes back to like play, heal, worship. I'm like, for me, that's like sex, mental health, and, you know, like, what was the other? Oh, and religion, right? So sex, mental health, religion, which is like my trinity of happiness. Where I like to work in helping people figure out what the best paths are for them, including being very religious, right? So that's definitely a path that I know not maybe a lot of ex-Mormons consider, you know, viable for them anymore, but there are still many religious folks who want to stay religious and can still benefit from this medicine extremely well. We talked about that last time. So on November 7th, so put this on your calendar. If you're a therapist, you don't have to be a therapist to join us. Any of you who are interested in facilitating, guiding, coaching, doing therapy work, you're welcome to come and take these CEs from us. Even if you're just, you know, wanting more information, like this 1 hour CE, even if you're just kind of the public and it's free, go register for it and listen to what we had to say more from like a clinical perspective. Both Aimees did a really good job. Aimee Rossi like focused more on like the actual medicine itself and explaining how it works. And Aimee Heff did a great job around sexuality and how it can help with sexual themes. And then I presented on religious trauma and how it can help on that. So November 7th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. So that's a Friday morning. And then hopefully you can take the rest of the day off maybe. You can come and sit for a 3 hour CE on this topic, but much more in depth. And then we also plan to do future things. So stay tuned.
Yes.
So check us out there and leave comments. Send us, you know, kind of thoughts of what you'd like for us to discuss. If you've been listening here on the Facebook thread, it's an easy way to leave us a question, or you can also DM me and private message me any anonymous question you'd want us to consider. So thank you, Dinahs.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. What a fun topic.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Naho tishki say the Navajo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. Något geschieht alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. Något geschieht alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.